Hello and welcome everybody to the new National Trends in Disability Employment, or nTIDE Lunch and Learn series. On the first Friday of every month, corresponding with the Bureau of Labor Statistics Jobs Report, we'll be offering this live broadcast via Zoom webinar to share the results of the latest nTIDE findings. In addition, we will provide news and updates from the field on disability employment, as well as host panelists who will discuss current disability-related findings and events. So just a few housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar is being recorded. We will post an archive of each of our webinars each month at our website, www.researchondisability.org/nTIDE. This site will also provide copies of the presentations today, the panelist bios, full transcripts, and other valuable resources. As an attendee of this webinar, you are a viewer and no sound is enabled. To ask questions of the panelists, simply click on the Q&A box on your webinar screen and type your questions into the box. Panelists will review these questions during the assigned question and answer periods.
Hi everybody, this is Andrew Hallenville from the University of New Hampshire. Thank you for attending the National Trends in Disability and Employment webcast. We have our standard agenda for today and some wonderful guests. Make sure. So, sorry about the dogs. They're actually outside. So the nTIDE is a monthly report that occurs on the first Friday of every month, pretty much the first Friday of every month. And the nTIDE newscast occurs, or broadcast, webcast, whatever you want to call it, occurs on at noon Eastern on those days. It's a joint effort of the University of New Hampshire, Kessler Foundation, and the Association of University Centers of Excellence on Disability, the University Centers on Disability. It's also a part of a Rehabilitation Research and Training Center funded by the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, NIDLR. We're going to first have John O'Neill at Kessler Foundation and I will be presenting the report. Then we'll turn it over to Denise at AUCD. Denise will have a brief interview with our guest interviewee, Max Show. Then we'll be turning it over to Stephanie Powers from the Council of Foundations to provide a presentation. Question and answers will be at the end of the program. Probably leave about 10 minutes for questions and answers. But you can also ask questions. You can ask questions via our Q&A box, the chat box on the Zoom deal. So I'm going to turn it over first to John to talk about the numbers. John, take it away.
Thank you, Andrew. The nTIDE is a monthly report and a press release, including an infographic looking at the latest employment statistics. And more specifically, we report on the employment to population ratio, which is essentially a figure that tells us what the proportion of folks with disabilities is that are working. And we also report on the labor force participation rate, which is the proportion of people working or looking for work. This report, the nTIDE, uses data as mentioned from the jobs report, which is released by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics on the first Friday of each month. As Andrew indicated, it's a joint effort between the Kessler Foundation and the University of New Hampshire, and we've been producing the nTIDE since for 4 years and several months. Next slide, please.
Has it been that long, John?
It has.
Oops, sorry.
Okay. Nope, back one. Thanks. The source of the data is it's from the current population survey, or the CPS, which is produced by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And it is, back one slide.
Sorry.
It's all right. Oh, all right. And it is, as we all know, it's the source of the official unemployment rate. And it includes civilians ages 16 to 64 and not living in institutions. And this data has been available since September of 2008 onward, when the 6 disability questions were adopted by the Census Bureau. We are not, what we're reporting is not yet seasonally adjusted, and that's why we are comparing the month that we're reporting on to the same month last year. We are currently working on the seasonal adjustment, and so stay tuned on that count. And Andrew, I'll hand it over to you and to report the numbers.
People with disabilities who are not, oops. Because I unmuted. All right, so this is the employment to population ratio for people with disabilities and people without disabilities. We see a 7%, or I'm sorry, a 5.7% increase from 28.1 to 29.7% for people with disabilities. So similar to last month, this is a good month for the population with disabilities. So it's up 1.6 percentage points. For people without disabilities, there was a smaller increase from 73.3% to 74 point something percent. My screen is hiding it. 74.6%. That's up 1.1% or 0.8 percentage points. So this is very similar to the last few weeks, as John has mentioned in the nTIDE report. This is our 16th, is that right, John? 16th consecutive month of increases for people with disabilities.
That is correct.
All right. So for the labor force participation rate, we also see an increase for people with disabilities and a slight increase for people without disabilities. So people with disabilities goes up from 32% to 33.1%. That's up 1.1 percentage point. For people without disabilities, there's a slight increase of a half a percentage point from 77.1 to 77.6. So again, labor force participation rate, it's a good sign to see both of them going up. People are getting more, are working more and are more actively engaged in the workforce. And this is a trend we've been seeing for 16 months, which is really, really incredible. One of the things that I've shown this in previous presentations, so this is the trend back to the very beginning. And what you can see in the trend is you see kind of the good news we're seeing. This good news that we've seen over the consecutive months, if we look at the last, say, 16 months, it's a plateau above what the previous 16 months were about. So we're really riding, our consecutive streak is riding this trend, but it's also going up over time. And so it's difficult to call an upward trend in economics when this is actually a relatively short span of time. It's not like decades and decades of data. But it's certainly, the good news is looking good. If we kind of break it down a little bit in this chart, you can kind of see the continued decline after the Great Recession. Great Recession occurs before the trend line actually started, before they started measuring the employment status of people with disabilities at the BLS. What you see is a decline, and then a plateau, a flat part, a major dip, recovery back up, to this flat one, and now we're seeing this period of growth in the last, say, 16 or so months, maybe 12 or so months. And so we're very encouraged by this. Of course, if I go back to the previous slide, you see that this gap is still pretty substantial, from around 30% to 75%. That's typically what we'll call the employment gap. That gap is still really pretty substantial. The one thing that I may have mentioned in previous months is that if we actually see this recovery, if we're seeing a recovery from this kind of flat new baseline that we had, this would be one of the first times that people with disabilities have recovered from a recession. That's the typical story for the recessions, depending on a few factors, has been this kind of ratcheting down over time, that with each recession, people with disabilities don't recover. There's a lot of research around going why that might be the case. But if this is true, if this recovery continues, it could be one of the first times. Sorry about that. I'm in my brother's house in New Jersey on vacation, and so that's my brother's cuckoo clock. This is the quietest place I could find. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over now to Denise. You can ask questions about the trend. We're very close to having the seasonal adjustment done, and it provides an interesting opportunity that we're discussing in terms of how we report month-to-month changes as opposed to year spans like we've been doing. So Denise, take it over. It's all yours.
Terrific. Hi, everybody. Why don't you go there you go, first slide. So I think you probably would have had to have been living under a rock to not know what's been going on in healthcare in the last month. But let's review it for a second, just so that we all understand how this applies, what's happened, and how it applies to employment. We've been talking about this for several months. I just want to make sure I keep you all up to date. So clearly, the Senate voted down everything that came before it on healthcare repeal. They voted down a straight repeal, they voted down the Senate version of a repeal and replace, and they voted down a skinny repeal, which was the one that would have basically passed something that nobody wanted to pass just so that they could get to conference with the House and try and figure something out. So what does that mean? Obviously, we've been talking in the last several months about the importance of all of those, certainly the BCBA, the Senate bill, and the importance it has for folks on Medicaid, and therefore for folks with disabilities and employment. The president is still urging another vote or letting the exchanges implode. Senator McConnell says he doesn't have 50 votes, so there's not likely to be another vote soon. And there's some bipartisan work starting to happen in the Senate and the House both. They're trying to find out if there are some things they can fix in Obamacare that either will keep it from imploding, that will fix some of the things that probably do need to be fixed, etc. What I want you all to know is that the Medicaid proposed changes are not going away. They may or may not come in a healthcare repeal bill, but the Congress continues to look, as does the president and the administration, on how to cut Medicaid and how to cut the funding in particular, but also on some level how to consolidate and cut the services, meaning what they want to be able to do is hand it back to the states, let the states figure out what their people in the states need, with the feds paying less. So I don't want anybody to think that the fact that there's no healthcare vote pending right now, or that 3 of the bills got voted down in the Senate, to think that Medicaid cuts are not still on the agenda. And as we've discussed before, any cuts to Medicaid make a huge difference to the lives of people with disabilities and their employment, whether it's through transportation services, support services, personal attendance services, even some pre-employment services. All of that is hugely important, and we still need to be watching what's coming and try to be on board for that, both at your state level in talking about Medicaid services and at your federal level. Okay, next slide. The other thing I thought from a federal policy point of view that you'd want to know about is a little bit about what's going on budget and appropriations. So the first news is there is no budget resolution this year. They have not passed one. The second piece of news is we are coming up against a debt ceiling, and so there will need to be a lifting of the debt ceiling. That's not on this slide, but the last I heard, the Secretary of the Treasury was saying that they had enough money, basically. They had the authority to pay, and they thought they had enough money through the end of September. So something's going to have to be done, and that's with a lot of jiggling around. So something will have to be done about the debt ceiling by the end of September. And for all of you who may have federal grants or contracts or any of those kinds of things, that's just a good thing to know. In terms of appropriations, it is likely that we will see a continuing resolution, and probably in the form of an omnibus, as we have in years past. The House has passed its labor HHS education appropriations bill, and the House is $5 billion below the current spending level, but frankly that's good news because the White House's proposal was $21.6 billion below. And when you look at where the funding is, or where the cuts are, actually a lot of disability programs are protected. The TIPSID program, which is one thing I work on in particular, that's the higher ed program for students with intellectual disabilities. That one's level funded under the House bill. The DD programs are level funded under the House bill. The IDEA program, the grants to states, which is Part B of IDEA, gets a little increase. So the Senior Community Employment Services program is transferred from DOL to ACL, from the Department of Labor to the Administration on Community Living. Again, in some budgets it was zeroed out, so that's not bad news at least. But having said all of that, that's one appropriations bill, and the likelihood is we are not going to see appropriations bills or anything really finalized until, well, certainly I would say until after the end of September, which is when the federal year is over. So we're going to likely see a continuing resolution and perhaps ongoing continuing resolutions until, I don't know, I've heard the end of the year even. So we'll have to see. But again, that's good news for all of you to hear. Next slide, Andrew. Now, a few things that are going on. Because we've been talking about Medicaid and employment, I wanted to give you a couple of sites for some good things around talking points and studies that are being done, more papers being done. One is a new one by CLASP, it's really short and really direct, and it's just the evidence builds access to Medicaid helps people work. It's that simple. These are good things for you guys to have in your back pockets. The other one, Kaiser Family Foundation, that one's not as new, but it came out in early 2017. Again, understanding the intersection between Medicaid and work. Really important. Talks about all of the talking points that you've probably heard, or maybe not. Most Medicaid adult recipients are working. Medicaid expansion reduces the barriers to employment. Flip to the next slide, Andrew. Under current law, states cannot impose a work requirement as a continuation of Medicaid eligibility. There's some thought that may change in the future, and something we should keep an eye on. But these are two just good pieces to have in your back pockets as this conversation goes forward, so you can talk about this ties between Medicaid and employment. Okay, next slide, Andrew. Now, on a couple other things, the ABLE Act, the National Resource Center, the ABLE National Resource Center has launched a month-long Able to Save month, and they are doing a whole bunch of work around this. You're going to see all kinds of, at least we hope you'll see all kinds of public information, web stuff, social media. There's an outreach toolkit that has all kinds of things in it, videos, webinars, personal testimonies. Again, this is, and I know you know this, the importance of ABLE in, I won't quite say taking down one of the barriers, but influencing one of the barriers to work, and allowing people with disabilities who became disabled before age 26 to save money in a way that they haven't been able to before. So this is a lot of good information that's going on this month. You'll hear webinars, all kinds of information. To the extent that you can pass that along, that's terrific. Next slide. Couple other things. This one I found, the 2017 State of the Science Conference has been announced, and it's in Atlanta, September 28th and 29th. This is sponsored by Langston University Rehab Research and Training Center. And it's targeted specifically on research and capacity building for minority entities. And I thought that might be of interest to some of you, particularly around, obviously, the historically Black colleges, historic serving institutions, and tribal colleges. And they're looking at rehabilitation outcomes among people of color with disabilities. Clearly a field that we haven't done as good a job as we could, and where a lot more work needs to be done. So I thought, you might be interested in that one. And all of these have links on them. So for instance, where it says 2017 State of the Science, there's a link to the registration for that conference. Next one, Andrew. Next one, there we go. And then this is an international one that just came out in the Lancet Global in the August edition that I thought was really interesting. And it's assessment of progress toward universal health coverage for people with disabilities in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been really trying to achieve universal health coverage. They've been working on this since 2002. And the question in this study is, more than a decade later, are people with disabilities getting better health care? Are they actually benefiting from this work that's happening in Afghanistan? The findings, disappointing findings, but maybe not surprising, are no. They are not. There's no great improvement seen for people with disabilities in Afghanistan, particularly in remote areas. And that part of what's holding that all up are attitudinal and social and accessibility barriers in the country that will need great change, and particularly in remote areas, for the health care that's happening, or the improved health care that's happening in some of the rest of the population, to actually get to people with disabilities in rural areas, or people with disabilities, period, in Afghanistan. And I thought that was fascinating. Next one, Andrew. So I want to move on, and you can do one more. Yeah. So I want to welcome our guest, and I'm going to adjust my screen a little bit so you can see Max and me both. Slide up a little bit further. That'd be great. Back one, Andrew. Thank you. Max So is an intern with the American Association of People with Disabilities in their AAPD internship program this summer here in DC. And I wanted to have Max interviewed today because I think he actually talks, it's a nice shift from the conversation I had a minute ago about international, because that's one of the things that, that Max is interested in. So Max, would you tell us a little bit about yourself, and maybe a little bit about the AAPD internship program?
For sure. So I am legally blind. I was born with retinitis pigmentosa, and it's, for me, and it's different for each person with RP, but for me, I have currently very limited vision in terms of my central vision, and I have some peripheral, but I can't see detail of my peripheral vision, so I rely heavily on assistive technology, screen readers, and to do most, if not all, of my work. I'm originally from Singapore, and I came to the United States in 2012 for my undergrad. I did my undergrad in Southern California and graduated last December. And I'm currently on the AAPD internship, which has been a fantastic experience. We're towards the tail end of the internship, and next week is the last week. And it's a great program where every year they, AAPD, American Association of People with Disabilities, they sponsor 10 to 15 people with disabilities, and these are either undergrads, recent graduates, or graduate students, and they fly them in. They fly us in from across the country, different parts of the country, into DC, and housing, airfare was all sponsored, taken care of, and they place us in different internships regarding the field of our interest. And so I was placed at AUCD, have had a great time and great experience here. And in addition to that, they also connect us to different opportunities in DC, connect us to leaders in the disability rights movement in DC while we're on our internship program. And as I mentioned, it's been a truly, truly fantastic experience.
I would say to people, if you're not familiar with the AAPD internship program, you should be. It really, the folks who have been in this program are, first of all, they're doing phenomenal things as they come out of it. We've run across people in the White House, we've run across people on the Hill, we've run across people in various graduate work studies around the country. There's lots of, it's a fabulous program. And to the extent that you know folks who might be interested in it, they take applications for it sometime in the fall, I believe. Right? Yeah. Right. And so people get placed, as Max said, they get placed within wherever their interest is. It may be nonprofit, it may be on the Hill, it may be in administration, it may be in private industry here in DC. It's a great program. Anyway, so let's go back. So Max, I know, so you just graduated, so I know you haven't had a lot of employment experience, but kind of what's been your employment experience, and what are some of the barriers that you faced as you've worked toward employment?
For sure. So so I've had some, as you mentioned, I've had a little bit of experience, not too much, but I've had some of employment experience, and so I can talk to that, and definitely what I foresee as barriers to employment, both what I've had and what I anticipate in the future. So first of all, I'll touch a little bit about my immigration status, because that intersects a little bit with the disability piece as I've sought employment and seeking employment. So when I first came to the States, I was a student visa, and with my student visa, there's a law in the immigration side saying that I had to go, for the first 9 months I could not work. And so that was problematic in the sense of obtaining services. For example, with VR, they require you to have a social security number, and I couldn't obtain that until I had a job, and I couldn't get a job for the first 9 months. So for the first 9 months, I had to rely on other places, which was cumbersome in that sense. After that, when I started looking for employment, and right now, when I graduated, and even right now in the future when I'm seeking employment, one thing that I'm definitely noticing is that, yes, organizations are starting to embrace diversity and more and more. And some organizations will even explicitly say we encourage minorities to apply. We encourage, even some people will even put disabilities in there. However, I think sometimes employers, they miss out in the sense of they don't consider how the way that they are promoting and advertising their jobs are sometimes, in fact, oftentimes, not welcoming for people with disabilities. So for example, a lot of the jobs where I've applied for, or when I was looking at, I was attracted by the title of the job, of the position, but when I went to like the list of responsibilities, like 60% of the list of things on that list were things that I could do, and 40% I had a huge, I knew that this is going to be difficult for me to do with my visual impairment. And that puts me and many others that I know in a difficult position in terms of, should we disclose before we apply for the position? Should we disclose during the interview, after we secure the job? It is a really very real dilemma that's faced by myself and a lot of people with disabilities as well. Even like things like with accessibility on the website, if the website is not accessible, that makes me think, is this an organization that I want to apply and work for, even though they said that they want to hire minorities. So and even when I got the position, there's still not a lot of knowledge in terms of disability culture within the workplace, and so that puts all these additional, and it might be implicit barriers, but there's still barriers nonetheless to employment.
I'm curious, one of the conversations you and I had as we were talking, you were talking about privilege is what you were talking about. And so I wonder if you would relay that piece of the conversation, because I think that's interesting.
Yeah, so one thing that I've definitely come to be aware of as well is that, for myself, even though I have the barriers in terms of someone with disability, someone with immigrant status, was that economically my parents were able to finance my education and things of that nature. So when it came to looking for employment, it was more of looking for employment for the sake of getting experience, not for paying the bills, when I know that's not the case for a lot of other people with disabilities. Definitely with immigrants with disabilities, that's a lot of times not the case. And so the sense of urgency, so basically for me, when I found an organization that was not inclusive or had those barriers that I mentioned, it was easy for me to just take my time to look for another organization or another internship that might be more accommodating or might be more inclusive or have less barriers. When that's definitely not the case for a lot of other people, especially immigrants with disabilities in this country.
So I don't want to ask you just about barriers.
Sure.
So tell us a little bit about where you see yourself in 5 years, or what your vision for your future employment is.
Sure. So after this internship, I'll be going to grad school in New York, and I'll be getting a master's in human rights studies. I definitely want to focus a lot, both in my studies and beyond, on intersections between disability rights and migration, whether that's immigrants or refugee protection. I think that's an intersection that's much work needs to be done in. And as alluded to just a second ago, in addition to that, a lot of immigrants with disabilities, because of both their immigrant status and their disability status, have barriers not just to employment, but getting services, whether it's healthcare or support services. And I know that that's an area where much work needs to be done, and that's an area I definitely want to pursue in terms of concentration, both in my studies in graduate studies and beyond after that, especially in terms of a 5-year timeline.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Max. I really appreciate your doing this. Andrew, I'm going to toss it back to you, and thank you all.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Max, and thank you, Denise. All right, I'm going to turn it over quickly to our next speaker, Stephanie Powers, if I can get this PowerPoint to move. Uh-oh.
I think I'm unmuted, Andrew.
Yeah, I'm just having a hard time getting the PowerPoint to move.
The video. Okay.
Hey, Dennis, can you reshare your screen? I lost control of the screen. Oh, there it is. I must have lost control. My power went out. My internet went out, so I probably lost control. Our next speaker is Stephanie Powers, Senior Director for Policy and Partnership at the Council on Foundations. And so I'm just going to turn it over to you before I butcher the name again. Take it away, Stephanie.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. And hello to everyone out there in the audience. I'm really glad to have this opportunity to talk to you today about foundations and the world of philanthropy. I think in the spirit of full disclosure, I should tell you that I'm delighted to be doing this for the University of New Hampshire. I actually was part of the inaugural team that started the Institute on Disability at the university back in the 80s. So again, I'm delighted to be back. We have a brief time to talk today. So my email was just on the previous screen. If you have any questions or comments as a result of this conversation, thank you. Please feel free to email me. I actually am interested in your experiences in trying to engage foundations. And it's helpful for me to understand what kind of responses that you get, what kind of challenges that you experience as you try to reach out and engage foundations in your work. And I guess I should disabuse you of the notion that I'm going to be providing a list of funders eager to write a check to your organization. Rather, I think it's always worthwhile to help organizations understand the culture of foundations and what they look for in grantees. I find that a lot of people think that, you know, we're like the local ATM, the private ATM that you go down to the corner and you ask for money. So I have some visuals through my slides here that I hope you can use as a reference later. So go ahead and to the next slide. So just a little advertisement for the Council on Foundations. We're like the oldest sort of organized National Association of Foundations. We consider ourselves a leadership association. We are a national association in Washington, D.C., and we do what national associations do. We look out for the interests of foundations. We have a team that works on Capitol Hill, keeping an eye on what's happening on tax reform. Tax reform has our rapt attention. Anything that happens with tax reform has an ability to, even tweaking a little bit on charitable deduction will make a big difference on charitable giving, which then translates to a lesser ability to donate and do grant making to organizations such as all of yours, as well as to nonprofit associations across the country. I just highlighted or italicized in the next two bullets really what our mission is. And I want to emphasize that our focus really, and Foundation's focus is to advance the common good, and that we have that kind of in common with the government. So having conversations with the government for us is not a difficult conversation in terms of what our mutual and shared goals are. It is the common good. And we really empower professionals in philanthropy. We are also a U.S.-based organization, but we do have a global participation. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we do is we support an ecosystem for philanthropy's work, and I think it's kind of important. A lot of people don't know that we have this. This is part of our culture, this ecosystem at work. Next slide. In our ecosystem, we have our foundations, but we have lots of other players that are in this ecosystem. There are donors, individual donors, who just give to charitable causes and take their tax deduction. They're not part of what we would call institutional philanthropy, like foundations. There are infrastructure groups. There are many affinity groups, which are foundations and funders that come together around what they're like-minded around specific issues. So we have grant makers for education, grant makers in health, oops, people are getting ahead of me here. Could we go back? There we go. And sorry, we have Stephanie, a lot
it has an auto, for some reason, an auto.
Does that mean I should go faster? So we also have, also in our sphere, are wealth advisors, investment managers. We have philanthropy centers at universities. There's a group of those. There are philanthropic advisors, people who advise foundations on the work that they are doing. Wealth advisors, the difference is wealth advisors advise wealthy individuals who are looking to either create a foundation or to give money for some particular cause. And then there are lots of specialized consultants that know philanthropy and are consulting with them on things, strategic planning, for instance. Foundations like to hire people who sort of know what they're about and what they do. Okay, next slide. Oops, going the wrong way. Now it's going the wrong. Oh, there we go. Next one. Okay. Oops. Always good to know what the definition of philanthropy is. It really is the love of humanity. Kind of the modern definition you'll see at the bottom is around private initiatives for the public good, focusing on quality of life. So this is basically what drives foundations, and this is the lens that they look through. It's important to understand, I found coming into this field, that there is a certain lens that philanthropy looks through. Next slide, please. Role of philanthropy in society. We really believe that philanthropy plays a critical role in strengthening civil society, helping to build thriving communities. And there are, in that last bullet, I wanted to point out that there are diverse forms of philanthropy. Many people think that foundations are grant-making organizations. They give out money. There's a lot of diversity in what foundations do. And in philanthropy in general to support their charitable causes. Next one. So this is the definition of a foundation. I always find that it's good for people to know what this is. And I put in red there some of the important kind of words. You know, they are nonprofits, But their principal purpose, and this is important, is to support unrelated organizations. They cannot support themselves. They cannot use their money. They can't put it in a nonprofit protected status, if you will, from taxes, to do things for themselves, their families, etc. And on the bottom bullet, you saw the kinds of purposes. They can be charitable, other charitable. They can be education, scientific, cultural, or religious. Next slide, please. Types of foundations. There are private foundations and public foundations. And there are different IRS rules that govern how private and public foundations operate. So private foundations can be a family foundation, a corporate foundation, and then independent, which can be a grant-making or an operating foundation. Public foundations, they're funded by a single source. That's the important piece. So when you talk about the Ford Foundation or the Carnegie Endowment, these were started by Andrew Carnegie. John D. Rockefeller started with an endowment that has grown and been invested over the years. So it's a single source. It could be a family. It could be a corporate foundation, city foundation, Coca-Cola Foundation, etc. Public foundations are funded by many sources, and this is what community foundations are. So we have lots of community foundations around the country. They get their money comes in through donor advised funds. They may raise money, create funds to help support work in their community. Next slide, please. So diverse forms of philanthropy. I think it's always important to understand what it is that philanthropy can do for you. It's not just about money. Yes, they do have resources, and the independent and private foundations have a required payout every year by the government, the IRS. They must pay out 5%. But there is more than just the general sort of grant making. There is the convening power, particularly with community foundations, to convene communities and civic leadership around issues that communities might be grappling with. It could be target populations. It could be disasters that have occurred in communities. It could be a variety of things, economic devastation, those kinds of things. Innovation risk, risk grant making for innovation. Philanthropy can do that. They can make decisions to use their money that way and identify where they might want to spur innovation. They have leadership and voice. They bring voice to issues. I think a good example is when Bill and Melinda Gates issue a press release, or President Clinton issues a press release for the Clinton Foundation. People pay attention. So they can provide that kind of national global leadership to bring issues to the forefront. Research is another part where foundations can fund research, they can undertake research, they can hire research people themselves, they can do the research. Program-related investments, mission-related investments are specialized kind of loan programs where they can loan money under market rates, etc. Gets a little bit complex, but it's another tool, it's another way to expend money on particular causes and issues. They can leverage with public investments like the government and other private funders. There's collaboration, fund pooling. Foundations can come together and create a larger pool among themselves. They can give consultation. Many foundations have very smart, wonderful people working for them who can consult, who can help your organization maybe understand an issue or understand how the foundation actually works. And there's a lot of new I call non-institutional vehicles now. There's online giving, direct giving now. There are giving circles, social good businesses. This is how our field is changing. We're going through transformations ourselves, and technology has sometimes been our friend and sometimes not been our friend. But there are a lot of changes that are going on in philanthropy. Next slide. And I borrowed this slide from our friend Elaine Katz at Kessler. I know she's on the line, so thank you, Elaine. When you sent this to me a while ago, I had remembered. But just wanted to give you a sense of foundation grants over the years. So between 2006 and 2016, the Foundation Center, which is kind of our gold standard database that collects data about foundations and grant giving, so about $270.5 million in the total value of grants. You know, in the scheme of things, it's not that much. I don't think it's great by any means. Next slide. And this one is difficult to see on the screen, but if you get the slides, you can maybe take a closer look at it. But the Foundation Center did this slide for Elaine, I believe. And there are certain categories that the Foundation Center uses when they're asking foundations to categorize their grants. So there are things in the category of rehabilitation or disabled persons' rights, housing for people with disabilities, vocational rehabilitation, independent living. So I think one of the things that we might do when I think about kind of our role is to perhaps work with the Foundation Center to take a look at how they're pulling that data. What are they calling these kinds of grants to give us maybe more accurate information on what foundations are funding. But this will give you a kind of a visual sense of what they're funding. Next slide, please. So what do you need to know about foundations as you're thinking about maybe a foundation strategy? And I encourage organizations to really kind of think about what's my strategy for engaging foundations and the philanthropic community. This isn't, I would encourage you not to sort of think of this in sort of a little bit of a slapdash manner. Oh, let's go get some money from, you know, a foundation over here, but rather to think about a strategy in which you engage philanthropy as a partner and as an investor in the work that you're doing. So what do you need to know? Well, there's a foundation out there for almost every charitable cause. I mean, it's really interesting to go into the Foundation Center's database and look at what people are funding all over the country and all over the world. Very important to understand that they are driven by mission and donor intent. Donor intent is critical. Foundations must maintain some alignment with the original intent of the donor, whether it's a current donor, a living donor, or it is a donor that is no longer living. So if you look at the work of Rockefeller Foundation, for instance, and the Ford Foundation and the Carnegie Foundation, these were early foundations in the turn of the 20th century. They still have commitments to what Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller saw as important. So maybe contemporized, but it's still there. Their boards are given that mandate. That is the responsibility of the trustees of the foundation to make sure that donor intent is honored. Many foundations are limited to funding in certain geographies. And so, you know, they may or may not be interested in talking to you because you don't work in their region. I would say that when you're looking to create your philanthropy strategy and looking for funding sources is to do your homework and find out who's in your area, who's in your state, who's in your region. This is not like government grants programs. Foundations don't typically, now some do, but don't typically just put out an open RFP, for a particular thing. Like the next bullet says, they don't necessarily respond to solicitations from you, but they do their homework to find grantees, to find those organizations that can help them accomplish the work that they want to do. This is a very important piece of foundation, understanding foundations, is you have to help them accomplish their missions because they have done a lot of strategic planning, they have set up priorities, they know what they're trying to accomplish, and they use grantees and they use partnerships as a way to accomplish their goals. Not all foundations are equal. You will learn that. Cultivating relationships is absolutely key. It's about relationships more than anything. They look for how your work can align with their work. It's very important. And as Elaine knows, and if there are any other funders on the webinar, there are idiosyncrasies unique to our sector, just like there are to any sector. And the very last bullet, I think, is very important and something that you all can help us with, those of us who are trying to broaden and increase the inclusiveness of people with disabilities in our field. They know little about the disability field. They really don't know that much. We do not have great data. Our demographics are pretty, frankly, they're pretty bad. We don't have a lot of people with disabilities that we know of who have identified who actually work at foundations, who are on boards of trustees. And this is an area that the council is taking a look at. We are trying to dig into this more through our program on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Take the time to educate foundations in your area about what's going on with people with disabilities in your area. What's the field doing? What are the trends? What are the no-nos? I mean, we know foundations are out there funding sheltered workshops, who are funding segregated living situations, et cetera. And part of it is because they don't know, really what the trend is and where the field has gone and where the advocacy in the disability field is. Next slide, please. So what do they look for? I won't go through all of this, just a couple of bullets here because I know we're running out of time. But they're looking a lot for, they want to focus on vulnerable communities and populations. So in a way, lots of people with disabilities can fall into this. They want to know that you're competent as an organization, that you have the capacity to use their money well, to report back, to work with them. They like theories of change. So if you don't know what that is, Google it right up. I think it'll come up. They want to see how their work, your work syncs with their priorities. They're looking for solutions. They could be looking for innovation. Social justice, equity, and diversity, generally very important in what they're looking for. So I think that there's a lot in the disability arena and with those of you, particularly in the USEDS around this issue, can be very helpful on that. Next slide, please. Just a snapshot. I went in and dug in to the Foundation Center yesterday and looking for some things in the last year in their data, which is I think 2015. They have a lag in their data. But I looked up the funding area of vocational rehabilitation. Now this may not be vocational rehabilitation in the way that you all know it and you all define it. But in our world, when they said vocational rehabilitation, what popped up is that there were about 2,500 grant makers, and there were 20,000 some grants. Now, these could have been grants that ranged, I looked up the 50 million to 100 million in that category. So many of these were in sort of smaller grants as I looked through some of the grant makers, but just to give you a little bit of an idea. So there are people out there who are funding vocational rehabilitation stuff, at least what they think is vocational rehabilitation stuff. Employment, there's some very large grants in employment, but generally not for disabilities. So employment is kind of a big category, but you can see there are a lot of grant makers, 694, doing 24,000 last year, on the topic of employment. So getting them to think about employment in terms of disability employment is something that you can build a relationship to help them understand that. Then developmental disability services. I looked at this because I was kind of interested in this. And there were some very large grants from family type foundations that were going to institutions, organizations that might be schools, for instance, for students with disabilities, could have been day programs. I don't know. I didn't dig that deeply, but just to give you an idea. Next slide, please.
I'm trying.
I'm
trying.
I think on my next slides, I had some specific examples. Oops, there we go.
Oh.
Oh, there we go. Oops. Okay, I just took a slice of the names of grant makers that popped up in the developmental disabilities grant makers. So you could take a look at this afterwards. But, you know, out of those couple thousand grant makers that are in there funding in this arena, many of these, I noticed that a lot of these seem to be, they were probably family foundations, which are independent foundations. And I think it's probably not unusual. Families maybe of means, who have wealth, who experience disability in some fashion. Next slide. Here just are some specifics I pulled out on Vocation Rehabilitation grant makers, FISA Foundation in Pittsburgh. I put the mission down there so you could see what the language is, because this is kind of the way you want to approach them. It's not to go in and say, I've got this project, we deal with people with disabilities or developmental disabilities, or we're doing employment, mentoring, coaching, whatever. Start with their mission and figure out how you fit into that language. The Reinberger Foundation, I think this is Napa Auto Parts out in Ohio. So they give a total giving of $3 million, but they give where the company has footprint. And I just wanted to share that with you, just give you an idea that foundations, you know, they're kind of all over the map in how they do this stuff. But they give, a lot of corporates give in the areas where they had companies or where they had offices where lots of their employees live. Next slide, please. Same thing, I just put a couple more in here. Minnesota, you can see the Phillips Foundation, Minnesota, they concentrate in 4 areas. Employment. Now, it popped up as Vocation Rehabilitation. I don't know what they're doing specifically, but at least they say they do employment and they do education to benefit low-income people. So, next slide. More, the Mark Led Foundation in San Francisco, and then another one in Oklahoma. The one in Oklahoma, I put that in there because they're very specific about what they do. They support only for Masonic Charity Foundation, the Edmond League for the Blind, and that's probably what got them in as a vocation rehabilitation categorization. Next slide, please. Just a couple of examples of mental health grant makers. And some very large money going into coming out of these foundations, for instance. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. So this is my best advice that I give to everybody who asks me about, oh, how do I get money from foundations? Never ask for money on your first visit. Always ask for advice and work to really build a relationship, help foundations understand what your work is, and take the time to do your homework ahead of time to understand how your work can then help the foundation do their work. So I'm going to end there and thank you all for this opportunity, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, can you hear me? Where'd my mute go? Stephanie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Oh,
yes,
good.
Sorry. Yeah.
So one question I have is, where would people find foundations? I mean, I you know, there's always Google and things like that. But are there resources out there to try to narrow down the?
Yeah. Well, you know, I would say the Foundation Center is really kind of what I would say is our field gold standard for really cataloging the grant making that foundations are doing. They review the 990s of the top 5,000 foundations in the country every year. And they've got a database and it's all set up. Now the database is subscription service. There's a lot of really good information and free information. For instance, you can get the top 50 foundations in every state that you can get. You can just pull off of their website. So it's the Foundation Center. They're located in New York City. They have I think an office in Washington, but it's I think it's Foundation Center online. But if you Google them up, I probably should have put that slide in there. But that's also a good source. I would say you could also go to your community foundation. In your community, they know who the other foundations are that are in the area. And you can talk to them about, how and who might be approachable. When our foundations gathering in those communities is also, to find out. Lots of nonprofits are trying to kind of get in there, but community foundations are pretty responsive to organizations that are in their communities. So if you're in New York City, the New York Community Trust, it is worth going over and having a conversation with them. There are also regional grant makers associations. So New York Philanthropy, for instance, is an organization of probably most funders in New York City. Most of those regional associations do have a list of their members. Many of the affinity groups that are their websites have their members on there, so you can see grant makers in health, grant makers in education, grant makers concerned with immigrants and families. I believe, I think Elaine would know for sure this status, but I don't believe there is a disability funders network formally anymore. So probably going in, there's a workforce funders network, Workforce Matters. So you can kind of identify foundations based on what their interests are through affinity groups. Well, a lot of those you can just Google right up to. I'm happy to, to respond to anybody who's looking for foundations in any region. We actually, on our website, have a community foundation locator at the council. Oh, I guess I should have put our website on there. We're just at www.cos.org.
Okay. Well, thank you, Stephanie. I put your contact information back up on the screen.
Okay.
The one way we're right at the 1 o'clock mark, but the one thing I always did was I do research and look for research monies, and I look for other people who are funded and see who funded their research, and then try to get connections to.
Yeah, that's right.
I may have asked for money in the first time, but usually try to make some kind of connection. So. All right. Well, thank you very much, Stephanie. Everybody on the call, that remains. Feel free to contact Stephanie. You could also reach out to us at disability statistics at unh.edu and ask questions or give us a call. But that's it for today. Thank you again to Stephanie and Max and Denise and John, and for all those who have participated in making this stuff happen. Thanks again, Stephanie. Bye-bye, everybody.
Yep. Bye.